All people from
Like
the
New
past
Yorkers
talk
from-
like Batman villains. It's the Bat! Like Batman street
like the
thugs
goons.
in Arkham City that you're about to pummel the piss out of.
Yo, you see that giant cyclops
There's a one-eyed monster here! Hello and welcome to another episode of That's Absurd. Please Elaborate, the science comedy podcast where we take the most weird, wild, wonderful questions from you, our listeners, or perhaps each other, and try our very best to find the actual scientifically backed answers behind them. I am 1/3 today of the stable three-legged stool that is the hosting triumvirate we have gathered. I'm Julian Huguet.
I am one of the other legs, but hopefully not the one in the middle. I don't know. What
kind of
Which leg
stools?
do you not want to be? And anyway, I'm Trace Dominguez, the other science communicator, and we have a guest this week as well. The third leg of our triumvirate seating apparatus. Ellen Weatherford.
No, see, the thing
Ellen.
I said was tripod, and that's because it's a podcast.
A tripodcast.
Tripodcast.
It's a three-footed cast. Well, this would be your third podcast that you're probably releasing. Ellen Weatherford, host of two other podcasts, Just the Zoo of Us, parentheses family friendly, and Spellbound and Gagged, parentheses not family friendly. And now you're our guest here today on That's Absurd. Please elaborate. Thank you for joining us, Ellen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to communicate some science with you guys.
If this is your first time listening to our show, we answer these questions that we get from you, the listener, and our podcast patrons have now started to be able to vote on which questions we pick, although that has not yet affected our episodes. We're very excited that we do have some patrons, so if you want to join, you can. There's, a little link down in the show notes. If you would like an absurd question answered, please submit it to us in the show notes. You can call us, email us, you can send it to us any number of different ways, and maybe it will end up on a future episode. But this week, we've got a question from Ellen. I'm going to go first.
I'm excited.
And I'm excited.
I'm
very excited.
I'm excited. We had to kind of fight over this question, and I'm a little bummed that you got it, but I'm looking forward to the ride. Go on, Trace. What's the question?
There was a full-on arena gladiator sort of.
It was. Boss music started
Very
playing out of nowhere.
Oh no,
This is
PvP
non-diegetic
active.
music
You
coming
cannot
from-
fast travel when there are enemies nearby.
Oh no! I hate that little blurb.
Ellen, do you remember your question? Should I read it back to you, or do you? She's like, oh, I remember.
I never stopped thinking about it. I've thought about it every day since.
All right, well, let's hit me with the question so the audience knows what they're about to get themselves into.
Trace, how would one taxonomically classify a dragon? I'm not talking like bearded dragons, Komodo
okay.
dragons.
Oh, okay.
That's already
The Komodo
covered
dragon,
territory.
it is.
Yeah.
I'm talking wings, breathing fire, straight out of fantasy dragon. Where is this falling on the animal kingdom family tree?
I love how surprisingly relevant this was, because just after you asked it, did you see that George R.R. Martin got really upset over this exact thing?
Really?
Did you see? Yes. So you know how there's the new House of Dragons season that's come out, right?
I'm aware.
And they have the Targaryens, right? And they have their crest. And the dragon on the crest had 4 legs and wings. And George R.R. Martin, instead of finishing the friggin' books that he's been working on forever, decided to get all upset about this instead and went into the taxonomy of fantasy dragons and winged, scaly, fire-breathing reptiles, and was very upset that the crest of the Targaryens was not accurate dragons.
I also have strong feelings about dragons that are depicted with both 4 legs and wings.
Yes.
This is
Yes.
egregious to me, abhorrent.
But let's not steal your thunder, Trace. Trace, where do we start? Where do we start?
Yeah, George R.R.
I'm
Martin,
so-
get back to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you're listening, George.
I don't want to hear anything from you until you're done. The next words out of your mouth better be, I finished the books.
I love that you guys brought up the hexapodal dragon right out of the gate, or really the creators of House of the Dragon, and then also us brought it up. I completely eliminated that from the research. When I first started doing it, I was like, oh, well, there's two different kinds of dragons. There's these four-legged with the wings, and then there's the, four-limbed where the front limbs are also wings. And I completely eliminated the six-legged dragon.
Okay.
Because that's really what it is. If you think about it, it's got 6 limbs. There's no reptile, there's no mammal, there's no animal that we know. That would be not just fantasy. You're talking like away from any kind of reality fantasy. There aren't any 6-limbed vertebrates that would, and it is 2 other limbs that would power those wings versus the 4 limbs that it walks on.
Right. It would have
so I just eliminated
branched off from us tetrapods, right? And
which it's in the name, 4 legs.
4 legs, right? These
Yeah.
dragons would be hexapods, right? And
right, yes.
You know what's funny is my wife has gotten really into Pokemon again recently.
Based.
Somehow.
Okay.
And she's
Extremely good.
Nice.
gotten me to re-download Pokemon Go. And now I'm looking at everything through this lens. And I want to say, first of all, something that drives me insane about Pokemon in general is their use of the word evolution. Because it's so wrong. And I think it's mischaracterized it for literally millions of people. Right?
Yeah.
Because you can have the same little Charmander, right? And when it metamorphoses into something else, it's like, oh, it's evolving. And you're like, no, it's not. No, that's not what that is.
They clearly meant metamorphosis, but that was too many syllables.
Generations, yeah, but no. It's not evolution. It's one generation that's changing here, right? Well, I was Gen 1, and I picked the little fire lizard Charmander, right? And then it becomes Charmeleon, which annoys me because it's going from a reptile to an amphibian, right? Based on the name. And then the last form is a 6-limbed dragon, although if you're a real Pokemon geek, not technically a dragon. But anyway, not a dragon type.
But if
called
palm tree
Charizard,
is, okay,
right?
sure.
And I'm like, if you think about it, right, if this single organism that had 4 limbs suddenly turns into a 2 feet, 2 hands, and 2-winged dragon, it must have sprouted bones out of its back, brand new. It's
complete musculature
horrifying.
would have to change.
Yeah. Just growing these giant extra limbs coming out of it. And
then that makes you wonder, which ones are the basal trait? Were the arms the ones that stayed, and were the wings the new limb, or were the wings the ancestral limb, and they had to sprout arms?
Yeah.
All good questions. To me, I just understand why Charizard Ash could never control him because he was pissed about how much his body hurt and was changing. Based on this forced, quote-unquote, evolution. Okay, rant over.
I'm an abomination!
Wow. You guys have some feelings about this? I have feelings strongly about... Do you remember the documentary Avatar, where they go to another planet?
Yes.
And there's blue people, and there's all these animals, and they get to, USB to the animals
and
stuff?
Right.
Yeah. The thing that bothered me wasn't the USB thing, which in itself is weird, because, who's in control here, and is this this is a little ethically dubious, but the fact that every one of those animals was fairly consistent with the way that it inhaled the atmosphere through its collarbone.
Right.
They almost all breathe through the collarbone, and many of them have more than 2, are not tetrapod. Many of them have 6 legs or more, except the primary species on the planet, which breathes through its face, does not have breathing through its collarbone like everything else, and only has 4 limbs. What?
It's almost like they artificially made them quasi-human-like, so you could relate to them more.
And canonically had boobs because it was sexier.
Yeah,
it's true.
They were like, "Hey, James, why do they have boobs?" And he's like, I like them. And they were like, all right, asked and answered, my guy.
All right. Nope.
Sure. Cool. All right, well, sometimes it's not about, let's not get it. So let's get into the actual question that we came to answer here.
Right.
How would you taxonomically classify a dragon? And for people that may not be aware, taxonomy is the classification of living things. It's got a couple of different purposes in science. One is literally just to make groups of things, and it helps you learn not just about the thing you're looking at, but other things that are similar to it. But also just because there's a lot of stuff in the world and in the universe, and we got to kind of keep it in a little order here.
Yeah.
And it dates back to Plato and Aristotle and ancient Greece. And Aristotle was actually really one of the first proponents or like creators of a taxonomical system. He identified 500 different animals and put them into a hierarchy, which he called the Great Chain of Being. And man was right in the middle of this. Like, if you think of it like a ladder, we were right in the middle.
What?
And at the top was God, and then angels, and then like demons, because he had, meta physical beings and like imaginary beings in there. Animals were all below us, so it was like animals, and then plants, and then minerals for some reason. But
Okay.
Yeah,
anyways,
sure.
very influential. He came up with the binomial names that we still use today, although they've been modified since, and I'll come right back to that in a minute. But taxonomy is not the same kind of science as a lot of other sciences, right? There's a lot more of the like debate part of science in this. Like, where do you draw the line between one species and another, especially with genetic data, which let's just set that off to the side as well and come back to it. And so I did a journalism.
Yay!
It's very exciting when we have any semblance of like journalism or like effort on this show. It's very, it's an unusual step for us.
I emailed many people, but I actually got a real interview and called Greg Watkins, the senior collections manager of vertebrate zoology, herpetology, and ichthyology at the Yale Peabody Museum in New Haven, Connecticut.
This is embarrassing.
Question. Was your email title like question about dragons, or like how did you get him to respond?
I said science communicator wants to know about dragons.
There's
and
no way
he
that passed those
responded.
email filters.
Yeah,
There's
right?
no way.
He totally responded, and he said he has a book of like where fantasy creatures may have evolved from and stuff.
You found the guy. You found the person for exactly this question.
I found the guy. He said the Cyclops, there is a pygmy elephant that was off the coast of like Greece and Italy, and when sailors got there, they saw their skull. And if you know anything about elephant skulls, it's got a big hole in the middle of it where the trunk goes. And so they're like, there's some giant monster here with one big eye.
Right in the middle of it.
Right in the middle of his face. What the heck is going on over
people
here?
in the
What else
past
could
talk
go in a
like-
giant face hole than a big eye?
Like,
All people from
Like
the
New
past
Yorkers
talk
from-
like Batman villains. It's the Bat! Like Batman street
like the
thugs
goons.
in Arkham City that you're about to pummel the piss out of.
Yo, you see that giant cyclops over there?
There's a one-eyed monster here!
This is going to completely change the way I've been reading Song of Achilles. My experience of I'm like halfway through the book, and my experience for the rest, because the rest of this is all like Battle of Troy. So I'm like,
yeah, I was
this
gonna
is about
say,
to be really fun.
Yo, hey, that Helen, she is a looker. You know what I'm saying?
I'd launch 1,000 ships for that face.
So I called Greg Watkins, and he mentioned that they follow the code. Let's go to the clip.
There's a code that we follow, the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. And we follow the code. And among the things the code requires is there be something vouchered in a permanent public collection. It can't be a photograph on someone's shaky iPhone or old Super 8 film of Bigfoot walking through Seattle. It has to be an actual thing in a real place, so that 100 years from now, a scientist can come back and look at what you looked at, and that's the repeatability of science. That's an important part of what we do.
I love we follow the code. Like he's a Mandalorian. Like
Yeah, very much
This
so.
is the way.
this is
This is the way.
shaky iPhone
Exactly.
photo of Bigfoot. This is not the way.
This is not the way.
Not the way. Not the way. So if we were going to taxonomically classify a dragon, first we have to find one, right? And then we'd probably have to, and he went on to say that you could get a really high fidelity picture, some audio, and a bunch of other things, and then they might be able to create a holotype from that. But generally speaking, they would want one, and they would want to be able to look at it and study it so that they could do what taxonomy requires. And taxonomy is a science that includes identification, nomenclature, and classification of biological objects. And the order of that does matter. So it's characterization, identification, then nomenclature, so you name it, and then you would classify it within the tree of life. So historically, we would do this by literally just going around and like looking at stuff, right? Like, oh, that bird looks like this, and here's the coloring, and here's the spots, and whatever. And Aristotle, as I mentioned, was doing this, and he came up with this idea of animals with blood and animals without blood. And that was his first differentiator.
Okay.
So he started looking at animals, and he's like, well, this animal in the sea, this jellyfish, doesn't have blood. And this animal on land, it has blood. Basically, he came up with the idea of vertebrate and invertebrate, but he used blood as his example instead, which, is what it is, but kind of interesting. And then eventually, his protege, Theophrastus, continued doing what he was doing with animals, but with plants. However, after Aristotle and Theophrastus, there really wasn't anybody doing this for a long time until the 16th and 17th centuries during the Age of Exploration. So we're talking Aristotle and then nothing.
But
then
they were like, we did
cared.
We nailed it.
They had
it's
better
good.
things to do. They're like blood versus no blood. I've heard all I need to know.
There wasn't anybody making a whole list of everything, right? Maybe within their regions or within their countries or within their local areas, but not let's classify everything. And then comes the Swedish naturalist Carolus Linnaeus. We still use the Linnaean system today with many caveats and different changes, but he continued the use of these binomial Latin names, and because a lot of people had just been naming things did get named twice. And so I asked Greg about that.
Back in Darwin's day, a lot of things got named multiple times because they didn't know that the people in Denmark had them too. So you have to make sure you really have the only one or something that looks different. Genetics, you have to have DNA nowadays because why not? The technology's there and it's not that complicated. Then to publish it, you'd have to put it, like I said, into an actual museum and give it a catalog number. They'll be cited. This is that specimen forever. And then the reviewers review it for the publication. And if they agree with your assessment that it's new, it's new.
So that's it. Which is why I said that it's not a science in the same way as we're finding the Higgs boson. And it's okay, well, we can do this exact same experiment 1,000 times. There might just be one animal that we've found. There might only be one. And so we all have to agree that this one is its own species. And then we get its DNA, and it's this raccoon is really similar to this red panda in look, but has no genetic similarity at all. And so we start differentiating in different ways. And as things come up, a new study is able to be invented. Just like in any other science, we end up finding new ways to classify and taxonomize things. So anyway, there's here are a couple of examples of things that we named twice. The Rosa sylvestris albacum rubore folio glabro is a pinkish-white woodland rose with hairless leaves. Then there's also the Rosa sylvestris indora sucanina, which is an odorless woodland dog rose. They are the same plant, exactly the same. And we just named it twice because two different scientists found it, and we're like, I'm the first one! I found it first time!
This must have been so much harder before the internet, right?
Yes.
And databases that were easily searchable.
It's also interesting to me that they both picked different qualities of the same plant as the identifying characteristic. Both of them found different things about them to be what they consider to be the thing. So identifying about it, they put it in the name.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point because it's like Aristotle said, blood or no blood. But if you start looking at all of the different types of life on the planet, you can't just go blood or no blood, right? That's why we do vertebrate and invertebrate as a big differentiator. But the thing is, It's all made up. We're making this up. This is a system that we've invented. And so I find that really interesting. So Carolus Linnaeus comes up with this system, and again, this is where we get like the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. He comes up with this kind of way of organizing things, and we end up using just that binomial name to describe anybody. So Homo sapien is a specific genus or genera, and then a specific species. Do you guys have any favorite scientific names or anything?
Boy, do I! I've got a few.
I mean, personally,
I knew you would.
First place I go to is the gorilla scientific name, which is gorilla, right?
Because
because
that's a good one.
they
That's a good
thought
one.
at first that gorillas were like in a genus all their own, right? Because genuses, genera are like the closest, like the animals in a genera have the most recent common ancestor, right? So that's the kind of umbrella they all fit under. And they thought, well, the only one in this genus is this one gorilla we found. And then they found another gorilla, and they're like, what do we name it? So they named it Gorilla.
Yeah.
The Western Lowland gorillas.
Every time they were like, this has got to be the only one, right? Every time.
And then you just keep adding more gorillas. Heaven help us if we find more, right? So
you're not going to believe this.
My mind goes. Ellen, though, I'm very curious.
Ellen, I feel like could have an entire episode just about fun.
Yeah.
I have one favorite that really stands out.
Okay.
Hot Wheels Sisyphus.
That was my nickname in high school.
Tell me everything. What is this?
It's a spider.
And is it multicolored?
It's a little spider.
Is it die-cast?
It's named after. This is like off the hip because I didn't think I was going to be talking about Hot Wheels Sisyphus, but
For sure.
like there's like a certain part of its like there's like a tract in its reproductive system that is loop shaped, and the taxonomists classifying it thought it looked like a Hot Wheels track.
Oh my word!
God.
So they named it. The
so
genus is Hot Wheels, and then I want to say that the Sisyphus part of the name was because like maybe it's like a different part of its anatomy was like shaped like a ball, and it looked like the ball, and they were like Sisyphus rolls a ball up a hill, and that gave us Hot Wheels Sisyphus, which there's
Wheels
nothing.
Sisyphus.
It does not get better than that.
So, I mean, I don't know. This one's pretty good. There's a trilobite fossil found in northern China, and its genus is Han. China, makes sense. The species is Solo.
Excellent. Yeah. Where else are you going to go with that?
Oh,
So,
nerds.
I mean, that's pretty good. Also, I went to a Reddit thread about this, and one of the top ones was the American robin. Do you know the American robin?
Turdus migratorius. Yeah, I sure do.
Exactly, yeah. It came up to the very top. That one came up there. And I did ask Greg about naming things like after stuff like Hot Wheels, or like there's a scientific name of Dracorex hogwartsia, which if you read Harry Potter, you know what that is. And Greg said, yeah, it's discouraged to name things. Both actually now, these days, it's become less kind of cool to name things after yourself, which a lot of people did, or after people you dislike. And his example was sometimes you name a parasite after a scientist you don't like, which
Incredible.
is just the best.
So petty.
No, bring that back. Bring that back.
So
Actually, we need to be doing that more, I think.
It's really good. There's actually, this one has a long and storied tradition in science because Linnaeus himself was being criticized by a botanist named Johann Siegsbeck. He complained about him publicly, so Linnaeus named a, quote, useless European weed, Siegsbeckia.
So this is tradition. This is our
at a
culture.
certain point, they're like actively searching for a new species that they hate. Like they're that petty. It's not like they stumbled on it. They're like, ooh, you know what? I'm going to a field somewhere.
They're out in the field digging through.
bacteria.
They're like digging through rotting animal carcasses for maggots.
I'll show him.
Great.
Alternatively,
That's great.
so my wife interned at the Natural History Museum in LA for a little while, and she interned for a malacologist, which is like people who study slugs and mollusks and stuff. And it's very, very small community of malacologists. So she went to like a convention or like a gathering for the Western Society of Malacologists, and there were like 10 people there, and one of the guys who works at the Natural History Museum, who's a malacologist, like studies and finds ancient fossils of mollusks. And because he's one of the few people doing this, he just has like dozens that he's named or named after himself in some way, or people that he knows. And it's like, wow, if you want to like have a whole bunch of stuff named, you have to get into like a really niche field, and then you can just name everything whatever. Like,
I'm sorry, I still can't get past that being like, hello everybody, welcome to the 12th meeting of the National Association of Molluscologists. It's lovely to see all of North America represented here today.
it's
all
true.
8
it's
of you.
Real small, and they're all cartoon characters, I swear. They're all
like,
so
hello again,
interesting
Bill.
and strange. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Bill, Jenny.
The gang's all here.
Yeah. Yep. And
Bill
they do
W.
presentations on
Aaron
like
Aronson.
slug representation in pop culture that annoys them because they always put the eyes in the wrong place, like instead of on top of the eye stalks, right?
I love
like my former school,
we need to
UC
go
Santa
to this.
Cruz, the slug's eyes are in the wrong place, and they're very upset about this.
Avengers
So good.
assemble.
All right, so Linnaeus made a list of 12,000 different species of plant and animal. He published revisions of this list, and the 10th revision was in 1758. And at that point, we just all kept using that system. And so we still use that today. Obviously, there's still problems, and you get things like scientists classify things based on how they look or people they know or whatever it is, because maybe this one scientist discovers a lot of biodiversity. So in the 19th century, Darwin discovered evolution and started describing it, and that caused all sorts of problems because it turned out that a red butterfly and a white butterfly might be the same species, but we never thought about it before, so now we had to go back and rename things again. And then DNA does that even more, so let's take that back and say, like, now imagine you have all these species and you're like, wait a minute, where do we draw the line between this amount of genetic diversity being a species and this amount not being a species?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you go? How far do they have to be apart from each other? Because we are all quite similar genetically. So anyway, let's get back to dragons.
Yeah.
Dragons are made up. So
What?
Some of this...
You're telling me now
some
for
of
the
this
first
we
time.
Can use.
This is really
I'm
upsetting
sorry.
news.
Sorry to say that, everyone. Should have done a trigger warning.
Yeah.
But they're made up. So because they're made up, we're not going to have a species. We're not going to have, specific things. So some of this I, also made up. I'm not the first person to do this. There are lots of different nerds who have done this over the years. But I did use some of their information and kind of compile things together based on logic, and then emailed another scientist at the Natural History Museum of London who got back to me, and I specifically asked him about dragon anatomy.
Do you think they all started like emailing each other, like, look out for this guy?
Is this weirdo bothering you too? Like,
He's emailed so many people.
Again.
So the guy who emailed me back is Dr. Paul Barrett. He's a merit researcher at the Natural History Museum of London. He's an expert in evolutionary paleobiology of dinosaurs and other extinct ammonites. So I thought he would be really good to weigh in on something like this, because if you were to just look at species that have been on the planet, dragons do kind of seem like dinosaurish to me.
I think there's a lot of like hypothesis that like early people found dinosaur fossils, didn't understand that things used to exist that don't exist anymore, and they just assumed this must be a dragon. Like,
I think about that all the time. Or like when people who live in mountainous areas find like seashell fossils from when it used to be under the ocean and go like, there must have been a flood or something. Like, I don't know how much like myth originated from like trying to explain things in the environment that they just had no concept for.
Greg actually brought that up in our conversation as well. He's like, commonly a lot of these things, if you don't have a holotype and you just have some small pieces or whatever, which, a lot of, for example, ancient human, we know a lot about from very small pieces of bone, and we're able to kind of piece, no pun intended, piece things together that way. But if you're an ancient person and you just see a giant femur sticking out of the ground somewhere, you probably don't think, oh, that's just a giant land animal that used to live here, and instead, like the Cyclops skull, you try and put it into whatever you think it is. And, Greg said he thinks a lot about this and what people actually saw when they wrote "Here be monsters" on a map, for example. What did they see that made them be like, that is a monster and we need to not go there? Because it was just some animal that probably still swims around out there today. So Paul, Dr. Barrett says that if we were to be able to capture a dragon, see one in real life, the first thing we'd want to do is take DNA samples. If it were dead, then we would want to pickle it in a spirit to preserve its organs. The skin, the soft parts. If you've ever been to a museum, they do have lots and lots of jars with lots of different organs in them. And if they could, they would remove and clean the skeleton and then maybe stuff the skin as a taxidermy specimen. Paul was like all in on taking care of this dragon and putting it in the the main hall or whatever museum.
I've been to a biodiversity museum. That was one of these like taxonomy museums that like it's in Vancouver in British Columbia, at the like University of British Columbia. It's called the Biodiversity Museum. But like when you go in, first of all, blue whale skeleton, like hanging from the ceiling. That's a flex right there.
Wow.
But then like the whole museum, it's set up more like a library than like it doesn't have like dioramas and like exhibits and stuff like that. It's like rows and rows of cabinets and shelves, and you just walk down the rows and look at all the like preserved specimens that are like either taxidermy or wet specimens in jars. Actually, while we were walking through, we could see researchers with little rolling carts walking down the aisles getting specimens out for their research that they were doing. So we got to see them like unlock some of the little drawers, and we got to like see things that are normally like locked away because they just happen to be getting them out for research. It's really cool. It sounds a little like morbid to be like pickle it and put it in a jar, but it's actually so cool.
Sounds like a great really cool idea, if you ask me.
I was there with my husband. It was actually very romantic.
There you go.
Guys, that's so cute. Yes, life is fleeting, and it's a little morbid to be here, but at least we're here together.
It was
What
cute.
if we kissed under the full blue whale skeleton?
I'm not kidding you.
How did I know?
Okay, they had one of those like fossil like footprints, right, of like a dinosaur like footprint, and you could like it was up on the wall so that you could put your hand in it to like see like your hand like in the like recess of the footprint, and it was a cute little like what if our hands touched in the dinosaur footprint, like
wow.
Hear me out. It's actually so cute.
That reminds me of the California Academy of Sciences. They have a huge wall in their main room, right? That's just like sea lion skulls, and it's like hundreds of them. Yeah. Hundreds and hundreds. They're just all lined up, and it's like they all look the same, but they're all a little different. And I've done a couple of videos over the years, one about taxidermy specifically, and like how long some of those animals existed in those exhibits that you go see. So I went to the Natural History Museum of LA, and the lions that are in their like Africa wing have been there for 100 years. That's a 100-year-old pelt, and it's covered in arsenic. So that's one of the reasons they handle it with gloves, to keep the bugs off of it, but also if you touched it, it would be bad for you. So scientists really want to be able to maintain these things for as long as possible. They had at the Natural History Museum of LA, they had drawers like that, and you open them, and it's just the same animal, over and over and over again. Hundreds and hundreds of ground squirrels or red-tailed hawks or whatever that are these different species, so that scientists can come look at them and say like, oh, these are all examples of this, and if we find a new one that's a little different, we can compare it to all the ones that we have. So with a dragon, we wouldn't be able to do that because we probably wouldn't have hundreds and hundreds of them unless we were a Targaryen. And so both Greg and Dr. Barrett mentioned CT scanning. So we'd probably digitally image as best as we could. We'd CT scan, we'd take photos, we'd like preserve the skin in some way. And Dr. Barrett said if we didn't pickle it, if we didn't take all the pieces and try and cut it into pieces to understand them, we would probably prefer to keep the body intact if it was the only specimen we had. And we would use those imaging techniques to peer inside its body and try and maintain it, mummify it in some way.
You need a pretty big jar.
You need a really big jar. The point is we document literally everything we can. Once we've documented it all, then we can start to kind of guess at all of the different domain, kingdom, phylum, class. Obviously, domain's pretty easy. But so I did ask Greg specifically what kind of things one would pay attention to when you find a new species.
When it is something that there's nothing you can really compare to, it's harder to say. But with reptiles, almost every species description includes a lot of scale count data. How many scale rows around the body, how many scales in a row of either a standard length or from the neck to the tip of the tail. Anything like that. If it can be counted, it is. Okay, face scales are wonderful for that because you can see them pretty clearly. A classic Tolkien dragon has a great crest of scales around the back of its head that probably means something. And in general, if you can imagine that it has to do with how you move, how you find food, or how you find a mate, people will look at it to see what kind of data there may be in that, because selection would have done something on that character.
So
I didn't realize that scale count was so important to the species.
I didn't hear a word he said because I noticed he had a Pikachu magnet on his cabinet behind him.
He does.
I did clock that Pikachu.
Yeah,
and I was wondering how he felt about Pokemon's use of the word evolution. And it was all I could think about the whole time.
I'll give you his email.
Yes, thank you. Hey, remember that guy who asked about dragons? Anyway, I got questions about Pokemon.
About the Pikachu.
Not more of you, no.
Let me throw it to you guys, right? So what kingdom do you think that a dragon would be in? I feel like we're probably all going to be on the same page here.
I don't think they're a plant or a fungus. So
right.
Animal,
so
Animalia.
That's easy,
yeah,
right?
I think we're going animal.
Animalia, yeah, it's a multicellular, eukaryotic, heterotrophic animal. The phylum would be then Chordata, which is a bilaterally symmetrical organ system, nerve cord, closed circulatory system animal. Then we get to the class. The class is where we start to get a little more fun. Probably Reptilia. It depends. A lot of reptiles are cold-blooded. Not all of them, but, interesting. So subgroup under Reptilia vertebrate, clearly. And this is where we get to just start making stuff up at that point. Because at that point, they probably do start to differentiate from some common ancestor, whether that's a dinosaur or something else. So, Paul, I listed a bunch of anatomical things that we quote-unquote know about dragons, using specifically Tolkien dragons, Game of Thrones dragons, and a little Harry Potter dragon for spice in there. Not Eastern dragons, because they're a completely different anatomy. It would be a completely different species, though likely related if we were to put them into this same tree of life. So I just wanted to stick to that Western fantasy dragon that you might picture. So it's got a bony skeleton. That skeleton's probably hollow because it can fly. If it can fly, it's got to have light bones. And so thus, Paul, Dr. Barrett says, having bones places them in vertebrates. Hollow bones appear a number of times in vertebrates. Specific types of bones or bone shapes would be more helpful features. He also said with breathing, they probably breathe with lungs, which is common in land living animals, amphibians, birds, reptiles, mammals, and even some fish. Interestingly, and I want you to put a pin in this, dragons are said to have a smell. When you are around them, they tend to smell not great, like brimstone or gunpowder. This is in some of the lore about dragons, so keep that in mind. They're tetrapods. They have 4 legs, which includes all land vertebrates, although snakes would be an exception because they do have some exceptions.
Sometimes less, never more.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, dragons lay eggs, and so according to Dr. Barrett, this feature is widespread across birds and reptiles, so that kind of gives us more data that they're going to be in one of those groups. It doesn't narrow it down much, though, and egg color and patterning might help distinguish eggs from other reptiles and other birds. They grow very, very large from very, very small eggs, which I found really interesting, and both of them kind of keyed in on. Dr. Barrett said the large size has evolved lots of times, so it isn't a very useful feature. It also changes as the animal grows, so you need to know their adult size versus their teenage size versus their baby size, depending on what species you're looking at and what specimen you have. And they don't usually use size much to determine taxonomy, which I thought was kind of neat, unless those species are really related and one only grows to human-sized and the other dragon grows to house-sized. Those might be different species. However, what Greg had to say about size was really fascinating.
Yeah, laying eggs. It's interesting. in the fantasy movies where they show the dragon egg and then the adult dragon, there's a huge disparity in size. That's not that different from dinosaur egg versus adult dinosaur. So what it implies to me is they grow really fast. Or they have some social order where somebody helps protect tiny babies. Yeah, so parental care is a thing, and it's often in these things that get really big and are pretty resilient on their own as adults, but when they're little, even a blue heron could swallow you. I would think that they probably have pretty detailed parental care based on having few but small babies that are vulnerable. Or you lay a few eggs frequently.
And I thought that was wild. Like the idea that it's like, oh, I look at a tiny egg and a big dragon, and I'm like, wow, that thing grows pretty fast. Like, yeah, maybe. Or it just like grows really big. And he sees that and goes, they must have detailed parental care.
That like makes a lot of sense with like you see this in a lot of like really large flighted birds, like condors and stuff. They dedicate tons of like energy and resources into caring for their young, and they don't have very many at a time, but they start off, these tiny little altricial condor chicks that they, grow to these massive sizes.
So you're saying there's probably, if there are dragons, there's probably like a mother of dragons that like really takes care of them for
perhaps
like
3 of them.
Seasons.
Yeah, multi-seasonal, good contract renewal, very solid. Something else we talked about then would be vertical pupils, pretty common in dragon drawings. And Greg says this tends to be from something that's nocturnal or evolved from something that is nocturnal. So even if it is a day animal, but it has vertical slits in its pupils, its nearest ancestor was likely a nocturnal animal, which I thought kind of neat. Makes sense. Dragons living in caves and dark places. That makes total sense. Yeah. Greg also mentioned, though, but that just because they have sharp teeth, which I mentioned is like, oh, so we know they eat meat, right? He's like, no, not necessarily. Sharp teeth doesn't necessarily mean that they're carnivores. They could be omnivores. They also could just be a threat display. If you think of chimpanzees, they would eat meat if they could, but mostly they have big, sharp teeth as a threat display to show other animals to back off, which is pretty interesting. Also, if you think about dragon size, dragons are very, very large. The largest carnivore in the world. Any guess what that would be?
Orca? Is it an orca?
I mean, they're not that big, like a tiger.
I did land animal, sorry.
Oh.
That might be more specific. I think the
Polar
orca
bear.
would probably be bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, still, there are much larger herbivores. I mean, by its nature, right? Or just things that eat things at like lower trophic levels, like
I'd say like on average, an herbivore tends to be larger than a carnivore.
Like gorillas, right? Pure herbivores,
quite large.
Yeah.
And which species is that?
The gorilla.
Oh, perfect. Yes,
perfect.
that.
But not the
helps.
gorilla.
We need to rein it back a little bit.
I also looked up the largest omnivore. Any guesses what the largest on land, the largest omnivore might be? I'll give you a hint. Also a bear.
Grizzly bear?
Also
a grizzly
bear. Don't say panda bear because they're not bears.
No, no. Kodiak bear.
Oh.
Okay, all right.
And then the largest overall on the planet is the whale shark, the largest omnivore. And so they can grow quite large, and so perhaps the teeth are more used for intimidation. And then there are some times that you see them grab prey with teeth, that they then use their flames and fire breathing to cook. So perhaps they do that, and thus they would have to eat less of that, because the reason we cook meat is to get more nutrients out of it without having to spend too much energy digesting it.
Yeah.
So perhaps they do the same thing, which would fit with being highly intelligent and also having those sharp teeth that they can use to hold. There are some undersea fish that do that, where they'll hold on to their prey and then consume it other ways.
I was thinking the long sort of needly teeth, that's deep sea right there.
Yeah.
Like all those deep sea weirdos have the really long needly teeth.
Yeah, because if you find something in the deep sea, you better be able to hang on to it.
That's right.
Like the odds of finding another thing again are slim. So you got to make the most of every chance you can to just...
We're friends now!
Screw that thing. So clingy.
Please don't leave me! A lot of people point to the Hexapods, which is a giraffe-sized, egg-laying reptilian pterosaur, and the main drawback there is that they look like a pterosaur. They don't really look dragony. They look more like, pointy and kind of birdy.
Yeah,
and so
goofy dumb birds.
The wing design of the pterosaur, though, does have that, kind of front limb wing attached to the body and then a hind limb. The thing is, someone went through the trouble to look at all of the different bone structures within those wings, which I really appreciated. The pterosaur has basically a really long pinky finger, and it's just like, pew, and that's where its wing attaches.
It's very fancy.
It's
always got its
pinky up.
The fancy you are.
Whereas birds, like modern birds, they're kind of fused together. They don't really have fingers. All of their fingers kind of fuse together into a wing.
The mega
and then
finger.
Bats have that and then bats have like the 5-fingered mammally wing thing.
Which is like how dragon wings look. Like they have like the individual fingers with the webbing in between.
Ellie Mayfield from the University of Montana, she was an incredible undergrad who wrote this honors thesis that talked about these bone structures. She cited something as the potential order for dragons as the Scansorioptergid, which is a small non-avian dinosaur that translates to climbing wings because it had hind limbs with an arm with fingers extending into the wing. So it's a dinosaur with finger wings. So that's pretty cool, and it used them to grasp while also flying. Sound familiar? Kind of like dragons. So if we were to go with an order of Serischia, which is the same thing as the Scansorioptergid, that would maybe make sense. Dinosaur only really has 2 orders. There's Serischia and then Ornithischia, which is mostly the herbivore dinosaurs, and so this one would be an omnivore or carnivore dinosaur. So it totally makes sense there. And then Greg told me that you probably don't want to use Draco, because at that point you're getting into the agamid lizard in Southeast Asia. So instead, for the family, I started looking in a different direction. Also, the Scansorioptergids likely hoarded shiny things, because they're more related to birds who like to hoard shiny things.
That's something.
So that's also why I picked that as the order. But now we're into family. So dragons, they have these wide-ranging habitats. They come in lots of different colors. They have teeth on the outer rims of their mouths. They don't thermoregulate, but maybe they do. So I came up with a family of Magnetorogammidae, which is a great winged dragon lizard. The Gammidae is actually a dragon lizard that already exists. So this would just be a giant winged version of that.
On thermoregulation, you mentioned that they are likely derived from something nocturnal, and they live in caves and seem to be adapted to the dark. That would imply to me that they have some degree of thermoregulation, because they would otherwise need to be spending time in the sunlight. Like they would need to be getting that warmth from the sun. So would, and they breathe fire. There's literally fire like inside them.
That's what I'm wondering, right?
I'm wondering if the fire source is something that's like an internal thermoregulation thing.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of the waste product from biological processes like us that is heat, right? Instead there is some chemical process that produces fire and therefore keeps them warm and active.
I agree. And it could be that some dragons are more warm-blooded or have thermoregulation and others don't. Maybe some dragons do have to spend time in the sun. Dragons come in all these different sizes in fantasy, and some live in caves and some live in castles and some are living on mountaintops and stuff. So here's where I split into 2 genera, Igneopteryx and Vesperopteryx, which is fire-breathing dragon and not fire-breathing dragon. The reason I use vesper is the Latin word for basically nighttime. So I thought that would be kind of fun. So, and whereas Igneopteryx is Greek for fire. Woo! So vesper, cool word, James Bond reference, tasty cocktail, evening star.
You could call them the Vespertine dragons. That would be so cool. These are the Vespertine dragons.
Great band name. Just going to throw it out there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's already a Bjork album, so if you don't want to get in trouble with Bjork.
Dang it.
I was thinking more really good roller derby name.
The Vespertine Dragons.
So then we end up with these genera of fire-breathing and not. And then we get to the species. And the species level would just be literally something that defined it from something else. So it could be, one might be regalis, which is an impressive or magnificent, so it might be just a really big one. So you could have an Igneopteryx regalis, which would be a fire-breathing, very large, impressive dragon. You could have the Vesperopteryx spinosus, which is Latin for spikes. So you have a spiky dragon that doesn't breathe fire. which makes sense. You could have the Vesperopteryx draconis, which is a medium-sized dragon, or an Igneopteryx viridis, which is a green fire-breathing dragon. You could kind of break it down however you want.
This is where it's jazz, baby.
Yeah. You just kind of make it up. You could have a different genre, too, for different skull morphologies, because if you think about some fantasy dragons have really long, kind of pointy skulls, and others have kind of wide, fat skulls, and it probably has something to do with what they're eating. And we would have to find a bunch of species that does that. But the thing we haven't talked about yet, fire breathing.
Yeah. We've alluded
How do they do
to
that?
it. I don't know. I was hoping you'd tell me.
How breathe fire they? So,
how do hot?
Bombardier beetles. Have you heard of bombardier beetles?
Oh, I sure have.
Beetles.
Yeah, the bombardier beetle.
They're so cool.
They're super cool. Julian, you want to tell us what they do?
Yeah, so they have, and correct me if I misstep, but they have two different chemicals in chambers within their bodies. And when they're threatened by something, they turn around and out of their butt, they combine these two chemicals which react with each other in like a explosive exothermic reaction, and they spray it all over whatever is threatening them. Which
100% nailed it.
might include Charles Darwin, right? Have you heard the story of when he
Didn't
was
put
out?
one in his mouth or something weird like that?
Yes. He was
That's
out
so
there
stupid.
being a naturalist, looking at stuff,
things in
and
your
they're
mouth?
like these really bombardier beetles. They're like orange with like the green, blue, like iridescent,
looking.
like wing covered wings, whatever those are called. I always forget, But like he's like, oh, cool bug, and he holds it, and then he's like, oh, another cool bug, right? And then he finds like a third cool bug.
Oh,
he's only got the two hands. He's like, where can I keep the first cool bug? Put it in my mouth.
The little goblin part of his brain was whispering in his ear. It was whispering in his ear like the Green Goblin. Put the bug in your mouth. Put the bug in your mouth, Charles.
So
Put the bug in your mouth.
I think this is inspiring, right? Because you can be brilliant and have ideas that change the world, and sometimes you can also be a complete idiot, and it's okay. Like, it's fine.
Julian, that's a really good
You're
point.
doing great,
Thank
sweetie.
you for bringing that up.
Put bug in Darwin mouth. Put bug.
But he didn't know what it would do,
No hands
right?
left. Where go? Mouth.
Only got one option.
He had no idea, though, that this thing had, like, this freaking shotgun ass and when he put it in his mouth. And I think it went off, like, in his mouth and injured him. I'll have to double-check that. But
Of
yeah,
all
like,
of the creatures on this planet for him to put in his mouth, he picked the one with an acid cannon.
Yeah, an acid cannon.
There you go.
Acid.
Hold on. He wrote a letter to another naturalist, Leonard Jennings, in 1846.
It's like, Leonard, you are not going to believe my day.
Lenny, my tongue is still hurting.
Under a piece of bark, I found two caribi, I forget which, and caught one in each hand, when lo and behold, I saw a sacred Panagius crux major. I could not bear to give up either of my caribi, and to lose Panagius was out of the question, so that in despair I gently seized one of the caribi between my teeth, when to my unspeakable disgust and pain, the little inconsiderate beast squirted his acid down my throat.
Roasted.
Oh, no. Wow.
Oh, man.
Wow.
If I was him, I never would have told a soul that story. That is so embarrassing. And he fully just like on Maine was like, you're not going to believe my day.
I did something real stupid, Leonard. You're not going to believe it.
He's like, Lenny, you understand, right? I could not have dropped this
Yeah,
beetle.
Lenny gets it. Lenny gets it. Lenny's a ride or die for
Dropping the
Barry.
beetle out of the question.
Good old Chuck and Lenny. Man, I would watch that cartoon. Chuck and Lenny.
Oh my gosh.
The bombardier beetle uses hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone, which is C6H4 and then a hydroxyl group. It mixes together, sprays it, and reacts, creating heat. So I spent a lot of time thinking about this because some people say that dragons breathe fire by ingesting things that allow them to create sparks, rocks and some such things. And then they produce hydrogen or methane, and they just breathe it out really strongly, and then, create a spark and does fire. But if you've ever seen those science experiments of like balloons exploding or like really soft things exploding, and by exploding I mean like they light hydrogen on fire, where does it go? Does it go forward? It goes up. It's lighter than air by a lot. So when you make something like hydrogen burn, not only is it going to go up, it's going to go up quickly and it's hot. So like if you sprayed hydrogen out of your mouth, just good old hydrogen, and we're going to assume it's not liquid hydrogen because that would require immense pressures and or very low temperatures. So it's just gaseous hydrogen. They're not going to be able to breathe it on anything unless that thing is above them. And so I was like, I'm not going to go with that. And instead, me and ChatGPT got together and came up with a few different combinations of chemicals. So we already know the bombardier beetle uses hydrogen peroxide, produces it naturally in its body. I looked up some other different things. For example, dimethyl sulfide, which is C2H6S. It's produced in nature by microorganisms, phytoplankton, comes from breaking down corn, cabbage, beetroot, and seafood, and it's a pretty common biological compound, the most common to contain sulfur. Now you remember, the dragon doesn't smell so good.
Would one say it smells perhaps like rotting eggs?
Yeah. Brimstone and gunpowder, which is how they are described dragons, both contain saltpeter or sulfur. So it could be that they store these two chemicals separately. When you mix hydrogen peroxide and dimethyl sulfide, you spray them into the air, they ignite and heat and flame in a, as my chem teacher would say, very energetic reaction, resulting in CO2, water, and sulfur dioxide. So you get that sulfur dioxide smell of rotten eggs as well. And they could both be liquids, so they can squirt them out of their mouths. They ignite. When they mix with oxygen, it actually adds even more energetic reaction, and then spontaneously ignites when air temperature gets hot anyway. So after a while, they don't even need to be like worried about sparking it. They can just spray the dimethyl sulfide. So they could have like a bigger vat of dimethyl sulfide and a small one of hydrogen peroxide, get things going, and then just keep breathing fire for a while.
Yeah, you mentioned that chemical is produced by microorganisms.
Yeah.
And well, like it would be difficult to scale that up to like being produced naturally by a very large organism, but a lot of large animals have like symbiotic relationships with like microorganisms that live inside their body. So they could have
absolutely
a little organ in there that's like, this is my little microorganism farm.
Yeah, my little
like
bacteria
gut
sack.
bacteria.
Yeah.
Yes. And that would explain also maybe what they're eating, or what they might eat something that then they have to consume, similar to a previous episode where Julian and I were talking about a roundworm that needs to consume chlorophyll or it will die. So maybe some dragons, can't breathe fire if they don't consume the correct microbacteria or something when they're quite small to populate their fire sac microflora or whatever.
Some animals, like pandas, and I think koalas do this too. They don't produce their own like the right like gut flora and gut fauna, I guess, that they need to like break down their diets. So they have to get it from their mother through her sort of
that's what I was thinking.
Gastrological process. So they have to eat their mom's poop to get her like gut microbes.
It's a poop transplant.
So,
pandas are the worst animals. I've said it forever.
And you did mention that the dragons would probably be exhibiting a lot of parental care. So mama's hanging around. So maybe she's passing some of those gut microbes to her babies.
She just squirts a little. Squirts a little out of the right sack.
I mean, I was
give
imagining
you a little of that microflora, and they just lick it right up.
I was imagining how birds feed their young, right? Just like regurgitate,
Yeah, and these are very bird-like, might have some similar instincts.
Yeah, so maybe the mother is like passing her like fire-producing bacteria to the young.
Oh, so like when the baby's first like flame spout is like a big moment for them, when they're young, like they can't do it yet, and then they build up the bio and they like hiccup.
It's really cute.
They sneeze.
Oh my God, so
and
cute.
fire shoots
So
out.
What would you name your dragon?
Squamish.
That's a good name.
Okay,
I don't know why. It's the first thing that came to mind.
That's great.
That's a good name.
What about you, Ellen?
I have a Dragonair in Pokemon Go, and its name is Andrias, which is the genus of the Japanese giant salamander, which I'm convinced is the animal that the Dratini line is based on.
Can you add me on Pokemon Go when this is
Yeah,
all
actually,
over?
I'll drop my friend code in the
Awesome.
chat.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, great. Just side note.
I got a lot of gifts I got to send out.
I don't know what that means.
I have
but
so many
I'm
from the
glad that
local
Julian's
Taco
happy.
Bell that I like sending out.
I'm going to get a postcard from Taco Bell every
bunch
day.
of Taco Bell art.
They are not sponsoring this episode.
They are not.
It's going to
But
be
if
every
you
day
wanna
for like
breathe
2 weeks.
fire,
It's going to be like,
might I
greetings from Taco
recommend-
Bell.
Okay, so to answer your question, Ellen, after this very long walk, domain eukaryote, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class probably Reptilia, order Ceretia, family Magnetero-Agamidae, and then 2 genus or genera of Igniopteryx and Vesperopteryx with various species, Regalis, Spinosus, Draconis, or Viridis, or whatever.
Yay! That was thorough.
That was very
you,
thorough.
Trace.
That was amazing.
Yes,
That's exactly
wonderful.
what I wanted.
It's hot.
Loved it.
It's hot in here.
Loved it.
And special thanks very much to Greg Watkins from the Yale Peabody Museum and Dr. Paul Barrett for answering my flurry of emails.
I can't believe anybody takes us seriously
Thank you
for
so
5
much.
minutes at all. That was
Amazing.
great. Well, Ellen, thank you so much again for being here.
And remember,
What do we always say at the end of every episode?
put the bug in your mouth.
Put the bug in your mouth. Do it. Do it. Put the bug in your mouth. Do it. Put the bug in your mouth.
Put the bug in your mouth. Darwin, Chucky,
Charles, please.
put the bug in your mouth.